Hi, welcome to another episode of I Own a Business, where we focus on helping practice owners grow the practice of their dreams. I'm your host, Dr. Steve Vargo, and I'm really excited to dive into today's topic because the topic is something I believe to be one of the more impactful ways to improve the culture of a team and also the overall performance of a business, but also something that I think we all too often either get wrong or we avoid altogether, and that's one-on-one meetings. And today we have someone who's literally written the book on meetings, Dr. Stephen Rogelberg, who is an organizational psychologist and author of The Science of Meetings, which has been on over 25 best of lists. And he also has a new book, Glad We Met: The Art and Science of One-on-One Meetings, which came out in January and is already receiving tremendous praise, including a SHRM Top 12 Workplace Books recognition and a Forbes Top 5 must read. So, Dr. Rogelberg, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Steve. Really appreciate it.
All right, we'll jump right in.
Sure.
I want to focus on one-on-one meetings because that's the focus of your new book, but more of a general question to lead in. You've studied the science behind meetings and how they influence productivity. So for all the clients and the doctors that we work with who own their own practice and say to me, we used to have meetings, but they weren't very productive. Based on your experience and your research, what would you say are some of the top reasons that you see that happening where people say, we tried meetings, they just didn't work, they weren't productive?
Yeah. And the, meetings are not the enemy. Bad meetings are the enemy. Let's not forget that meetings are an evolution of the command and control systems of the Industrial Revolution. Meetings are essential for communication, cooperation, consensus decision making, coordination. In many ways, this is where organizational democracy takes place. So just eliminating a meeting and throwing up your arms is not the best idea, actually, and it can result in unintended consequences. So I would much prefer someone saying, hey, we need to gather, because that's what humans do, and that's what effective organizations do. We need to gather. How can we do it in a way that actually works for us? And that's the challenge for the various owners. I mean, there's lots of reasons why meetings go south, but they're fixable, right? So reasons such as, it's not a compelling purpose, over invited, too long, leader doesn't facilitate, not a compelling agenda. Like there's lots of reasons, but again, they're manageable if the leader's willing to address them.
And I think some of the reasons that team meetings go wrong could be resolved in one-on-one meetings, and we'll dig into that a little bit. But I'm really curious to hear your perspective. First, again, maybe just more of a general question, but for a lot of those offices that we work with, that maybe they are having team meetings, what we
Mm-hmm.
tend to call staff meetings, but they're not necessarily having one-on-one meetings, which is much less common, I find, in my industry, and
Yeah.
maybe that's not unique to optometry.
Right.
What would you say are some of the key benefits to meeting one-on-one that you couldn't necessarily
Sure.
accomplish in a group environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let's back up and let's clarify to your listeners what we're talking about with a one on one. Clearly, our days are filled with one on one encounters, but that's not what I mean when I'm saying a one on one meeting. What I mean by a one on one meeting is when a manager or leader intentionally schedules a meeting with her reports, and this meeting is facilitated and orchestrated by the manager, but it's not for them. It is not for them. It is for their direct. It is for their direct to be able to share what's on their minds, their concerns, their worries, their future, wherever they want to go. It is a leader's opportunity to truly see their people and foster a connection. When we think about the pandemic, people didn't miss going into a physical location per se. What they missed was connection. And one on ones are this vehicle for genuine connection. One on ones are the opportunity for a leader to truly live their values. Everything a leader does is a signal to their people about who they are and what they value. Everything they don't do is also a signal. So if you don't do one on ones, then you're communicating implicitly that your people are, it's a transactional relationship. They're just moving the dial on something and you're not overly vested in their success and their future. When a leader does have regular one-on-ones, the outcomes are compelling. There's tremendous data on this. I mean, Gallup had a study involving over 1 million managers. So this is not small data sets. And basically, when one-on-ones are done, employees are more productive, teams are more productive, employees are more engaged. They tend to stay longer in the organization. We've all heard the adage that people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad bosses. Well, one-on-one's your opportunity to prove you're not a bad boss. And the other piece of it, though, is that one-on-ones are actually good for the manager. Managers are ultimately evaluated by the success or lack thereof of their people. So to the extent that you elevate them, it looks good for you. Furthermore, one of the surprising things that came from our data was that when managers were doing these on a regular basis, they actually reported that they were more productive because they weren't interrupted as frequently. Basically, employees would save their topics for this predictable one-on-one. So managers were in a greater position to get into flow, which is great. So yeah, the benefits are clear. I frame this as, in the book and when I do speeches, this idea I'm going to make the case for one-on-one meetings. But I end by saying the case is irrelevant. You have to do it. This is 21st century leadership. This is what managers and leaders do. They find time to meet with their people and listen and engage and support in an active, intentional way. And I'll leave you this with one last thing as your listeners are going, oh gosh, I have no time for this. Well, I have two responses. First, what the data seem to suggest is that it's less about the quantity of minutes that you do one-on-ones and more about the regularity and quality of the minutes. So even doing these 20 minutes every week or every other week seems to be very beneficial. We can all find that time. Second, I'd rather leaders go through their calendars and start shedding unproductive and unimportant activities. So I have a chapter in the book that's really about how to figure out which meetings you should get away with, do away with, so that you can recapture that time.
Is it safe to say too that you could potentially save yourself time on the back end by having more meetings on the front end because you avoid a lot of the problems that I tend to find come from a lack of communication? I find that nearly all the problems I hear within an
Yeah.
organization stem
Yep.
from some form of miscommunication, poor communication, lack of
Yeah.
communication, no
Yeah.
communication. It traces back to that. So I would also suggest that if you feel like you don't have enough time, partly that might be because you're spending so much time putting out the fires from not having the meetings on the front end.
I really like that, Steve. I think that's a great point. Yeah, I think that's really good. What people need to realize in the absence of communication is communication, right? When people don't have the information, they'll get it from someplace, most likely the grape.
Oh,
Yep. But managers have to realize in the absence of communication, there is still communication. When people don't know something, they just seek it out using channels that tend to be inaccurate, right? Rumors, gossip, the water cooler, all kinds of things. So if you're not getting ahead of the communication, yeah, you're definitely going to confront problems. People won't be able to do their jobs as effectively. And you have to get them to unlearn the misinformation that they acquired in the vacuum that you created by your choices.
can you speak to the quality? You answered one of my questions before, and even as I was, thinking of the question, I thought there's not going to be an obvious answer to this, but I was going to ask you about how you structure the meetings. Are there any general rules on how long or how often? Which, as you already stated, that's not highly relevant, but rather it's the quality of the conversation. Can you speak to that? Because I think there's a reluctance on both sides to have these, because I think on a manager side,
Yeah.
an employer's side, there's a reluctance to give feedback that might be uncomfortable. And there's
Mhm.
also the feeling on the other side thinking, uh-oh, it's time for my one-on-one. And there's a
Yeah.
reluctance there. So how should you structure these so they're actually there's a high quality conversation that hopefully both sides walk away
Yeah.
feeling good about?
So first of all, I feel I don't care all that much about how the manager goes away. This is not for them. I don't care that much.
Mhm.
And the feedback piece, and then I'll hit your, we can go harder on it. But basically, in these one-on-ones, you're only providing feedback to your direct if they ask for it, or you ask if they be interested. If you need to provide some big corrective feedback, you have lots of vehicles for do that. Managers can meet with their people anytime they want. They can send emails anytime they want. They could have team meetings whenever they want. So managers can get status updates, provide feedback. They have lots of vehicles for this. This is something different, right? This is that little opportunity. It's the one opportunity that you're giving an employee to share their needs and thoughts. So they very likely will say, hey, I'd love to get your feedback and reactions to X, but they might not do that. And if they don't bring it up, but you feel like there is something really relevant to do, I wouldn't do it at this one-on-one. I think you can find another vehicle to do it, or raise it gently and see if they want to talk about it. But we want to give the power to the direct in this tiny little window. We want to give them the power. And then going back to, so we talked about the number of minutes of these. So typical is 30 minutes. That's typical. If it's every week, an hour, if it's every other week, that's typical, but those aren't sacred. So we can flex them. The cadence, the data are pretty clear that these things need to be done every week or every other week. The monthly cadence just doesn't seem to generate the same outcomes. And interestingly, when we collected data on people's preferences, it was also weekly and every other week. So that's kind of neat when preference data actually lines up with effectiveness data. That's pretty awesome when that happens. When the meetings are more than every other week or so, there's just no momentum. You can't build a relationship that way.
Can I ask a little bit more for you to peel back the why around why a manager would not would just take a position of listening unless something was solicited from the direct? What is the reason for that? Because I think that actually is for a lot of people that's really the opposite of what they thought the whole one-on-one
Yeah.
was about. I need to get
Yeah.
my team member in there and tell them what they're doing right, what they're doing
Yeah.
wrong, and they need to listen to me. Can you
Yeah.
help us unpack that
Sure.
a little bit?
It's the idea that we want, there are things that benefit a manager, right? If we ask for status updates, if we track metrics, if we give feedback about something, ultimately we're doing our agenda. That's our needs. We're meeting our needs. We're checking off the things that we think we have to do. But as a manager, we can achieve those ends in lots of different ways. We have a lot of different vehicles for doing that. We can meet with people. We can meet with our directs anytime we want. Like if we said, hey, we need to meet with you tomorrow, they're there. All we're trying to do to have the potentially transformative effects of a one-on-one is we want to find this little window where we are giving the direct authority and power to have an agenda of what things are on their mind. The manager can certainly say, hey, if there's anything you'd like feedback on, I'm happy to do it. They're very entitled to do that. But if a manager goes into the one-on-one basically saying, okay, I got feedback for you on this project, and I also want to know what's going on with this project, then the meeting is no longer the same. It's different. It's a manager's meeting. You have a power difference here. It's a pretty dramatic power difference. And so what we're trying to do is the party without the power, we're still trying to give them an opportunity for control and addressing what's on their mind. And the manager just undermines that if they start imposing their checklist of items. I just can't say enough. Like people the idea of giving someone an opportunity to connect with you on their terms is very profound and meaningful. And we can all reflect on this ourselves. Think about a time when a person in power took a genuine, caring, and supportive interest in us, just listened, reacted as to our needs and thoughts, right? It's transformative. We don't forget those experiences. They change us. And if once we contaminate that with our own needs, then the efficacy of the experience drops dramatically.
I think you and I both have an interest in research and psychology. And there's some research that I had read before on why don't employees do what you want them to do? And one of the top reasons was they don't like your ideas. Now, they're not always going to vocalize
Yeah.
that. So, to your point, I suppose, is if a manager were to come in and start saying, this is what we need to do, this is what we need to work on, this is how we need to do it, and they don't like your ideas or they think they've got a better idea, but they're not given a chance to hear it, it's one of the top reasons that
Yeah.
you do get that resistance
Yeah.
in an organization. And the flip side of
Yeah.
that is that, again, not my opinion, but based on research, when you listen to other people's ideas, when the time does come for you to suggest your ideas to them, they actually like your ideas
I
better.
agree. You are so correct, Steve. And there's something in psychology called the fundamental attribution error. And generally, when we see someone behave in a particular way, let's say they're late to work, humans tend to make the attribution that that person's just lazy, not conscientious. We explain their behavior as a individual thing, right? It's something associated with them. When something, but for us, when we do something wrong, we typically blame it on external factors. So basically, we give the benefit of the doubt to ourselves and we don't give the benefit of the doubt to others. But that changes once you start to trust and know that other person. So when the employee starts to really understand the leader and feel a connection, then when that leader does propose an idea, they tend to be much more willing to pursue it and explore it. And when things aren't working right away, they're actually vested in trying to make it work. We all know that we tend to go the extra yard when we care about and like and respect the other party. And one-on-ones you're filling that bank.
Stephen, we started talking, and I had mentioned that perhaps some of the problems that people, that managers, employers experience in terms of meetings being unproductive could be resolved in one-on-one meetings. Something I hear a lot is, and it's sort of framed as a complaint, and I don't know if it should be or not, but for our practice owners, our clients that have team meetings will sometimes mention certain employees that never speak up in meetings. And I think it's a
Yeah.
point of frustration. So I think maybe a two-part question here. One, is there a way to get them to speak up? And or should we just
Yeah.
accept in a team meeting that they're not comfortable in that environment? And is that something that a one-on-one meeting would allow, would be good for that
Mhm.
person? If you're not
Yeah.
having one-on-one meetings, then you've got these staff, it's just
Mhm.
uncomfortable in a group environment
Yeah.
speaking up. Would that be something that they would be more open to?
Before I answer the question, I had one other thought just pop into my mind about your last question. So let me just throw that out there. Um, what you will find is that when you're having really good one-on-ones, and actually it kind of relates to your question, as you build this relationship through excellent one-on-ones, engaging with their thinking, their ideas, they're actually going to start asking you for feedback because that's just the natural consequence of trust. And I'll tell you this, someone asking for your feedback and you giving it to them tends to be a heck of a lot more impactful than you just giving feedback. Okay. Now, that does tie actually into your other question because ultimately these one-on-ones are building trust and safety, psychological safety. And that could translate in team meetings with a greater propensity to disclose and share and interact and engage.
We obviously, a lot of these principles don't specifically apply to just meetings in a a work environment, it's communication. A lot of
Yeah.
it is just
Yeah.
communication. So the
Yeah.
point of asking questions when they start asking for your feedback, it's interesting because I bring that a lot, bring that up a lot in sales scenarios. We work in an industry, optometry, where we
Yep.
actually sell products and opticians sell. And I've mentioned before that you know you're on the right track when the patient or the consumer is asking you questions versus you just
Mhm.
trying to pose upon them a lot of
Yeah.
information to get them to buy something. Curiosity really drives most of our decisions.
Yeah.
It's not being
Yeah.
told what to do. It's when somebody can put you in a
Yeah.
curious frame of mind. So if you're in a sales position, I think you know you're on the right path when they're asking you
Yeah.
questions. Um, the just a few more questions here. One of them is obviously, again, not unique to optometry, but a lot of businesses struggling with retention of employees.
Yeah.
So more communication, more meetings, more one-on-one meetings. What kind of impact have you seen in terms of the employee retention within companies?
There's two pieces that connect to your question. First of all, we do know that when employees are experiencing bad meeting after bad meeting after bad meeting, they are more likely to leave the organization. Okay. So that's the direct. The one on ones, we also know that when those are happening effectively, retention increases. When you feel a genuine connection, you just are willing to persevere, give the benefit of the doubt, all kinds of things that lead to your staying. So those industries in particular that don't tend to pay super well, or those industries that tend to have extra stress, um, boy, they really benefit from one-on-ones, because it creates the why you're staying despite those challenges.
And I think it's just something we all want is to be heard and understood.
I agree.
There's nothing unique about meetings. I have one more question for you, Stephen. How do you know it's working? So as far as measuring meeting effectiveness, let's say for optometry practice owners who want to implement better meetings, but they're not sure how to gauge the success. Are there any specific
Yeah.
metrics or signs that you can point to that say, yeah, this is working?
What organizations need to do is build into their employee engagement surveys some content around meetings. Um, so this is something I do with organizations, but they can do it on their own. Um, Sometimes I do a meeting culture assessment as a baseline, so an organization can do that too. So yeah, we certainly want to have some evaluation. Listen, we know, I mean, employees are screaming at the top of their lungs about frustration in meetings. So they're going to let you know if things have gotten better. This is something we're really comfortable talking about. But in the absence of those voices, yeah, surveying our people, regularly is considered best practice, no matter what the industry, no matter what the sector. So we just could start to build in some content around that.
Well, Stephen, thanks so much for sharing. We had talked once before, and I wanted you to come back on because I know that this is a issue that a lot of our clients struggle with, how to not just having meetings, but how to make them more productive. So I really appreciate what you can bring to this discussion. And your books are really fantastic. I haven't read the second one yet, but I did read the first one. A lot of great insights into how to have a better meeting. So how do
Yeah,
people find you? How do they
sure.
find your books? And what do you do when you're not doing my podcast? As far as you work with organizations, you
Yeah.
speak. Tell us a
Yeah,
little bit about yourself.
sure. So yeah, I definitely work with a lot of organizations. I've been really fortunate to be able to talk about this content really around the globe, from really large organizations, from Google to the United Nations to even testifying to Congress. So it's great to talk about it. I also spend a lot of my time working with nonprofits. That's real important to me. And then teaching, working with doctoral students, and not hard to stay busy. Um, in terms of getting a hold of me, my website is pretty, I think, helpful. So it's stephenrogelberg.com. And I've really tried to make it into a repository of information. There's so many resources on there. There's also links to buy both my books. I do want to emphasize, especially to your listeners, because I think they'll appreciate this, perhaps even more than others. I'm not making a penny off of these. I'm donating all my royalties to the American Cancer Society to help support the eradication of cancer. So buy the books if you want to learn more about one-on-ones and meetings, or buy the books if you want to help eradicate cancer. Both are fantastic. So definitely reach out if you have any questions. Always happy to help.
Well, thanks so much, Stephen. I really appreciate it. Maybe we can get you at an IDOC meeting one of these times and people can learn from you in person. But thanks again for sharing.
You're very welcome.
So thanks to Stephen, and thanks everyone for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to our podcast wherever you're listening, leave a review, and share it with friends and colleagues. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And to learn more about IDOC, at our website, idoc.net. That's idoc.net. And check out the links in our show notes for some helpful resources for your practice. So see you next time, and keep dreaming big.